Hey guys, it's Jeff at Fleece Performance. Just wanted to introduce to you our new dual pump kit for the 6.7 Dodge Ram Cummins. First of all, what I'm going to do is introduce some of the parts to you, show you some of the kit components, and then we're going to get into the installation instructions. Starting out here, we've got our dual pump belt. Obviously, if you're going to put another pump on your truck, you're going to have a need for a longer belt, and this belt is going to be the exact size that you're going to need with our kit bolted onto your truck. Moving down here are your high pressure lines. So these high pressure lines are going to adapt your new pump to the fuel rail to allow you to have two pump feeds to your fuel rail. And these are custom bent lines to fit our kit specifically. And then you've got your dual pump bracket. This dual pump bracket mounts directly to the front of your motor and holds your dual pump. Then you bolt your dual pump pulley to the second pump and you install the pump nut onto the pump cam and torque to 75 foot-pounds. Now, it's very important that you don't use an impact on this nut. Alright, and then you have the junction block, which mounts between the two high-pressure feed lines. The junction block gives you the ability to relocate the fuel pressure sensor from the back of the fuel rail to the junction block. Now, the fuel rail sensor gets torqued to 75 foot-pounds as well. Moving on to our dual CP3 wiring harness. The way that this works is it actually uses your factory ECM to control both CP3s simultaneously. And yes, your factory ECM does have plenty of capacity to do so. And you don't need an expensive dual pump controller. Obviously, it's going to require aftermarket tuning, but with some good aftermarket tuning, it will control both of your CP3s just perfectly. Now, that's our standard kit. With our deluxe kit comes our fuel distribution block as well as our hose and fitting kit, which is going to give you all the ability to hook up your low pressure fuel as well. So if you have an aftermarket lift pump, you can feed that directly into your fuel distribution block, and then you can neat and cleanly distribute the fuel. Now, the feed fuel is going to use this lower galley, so the feed fuel is going to come in here and then be distributed to both CP3s out of these two ports. The return fuel is nice because we get to use your factory return setup, the Banjo fittings that go in your fuel filter assembly will bolt exactly in place right here on either side of the distribution block, and then your fuel return from your second CP3 will feed right into here and then flow back through your factory plumbing. Hey guys, we're ready to do our installation of our dual pump kit, our deluxe dual pump kit, which means we're going to install our distribution block, our hose and fitting kit, and our dual pump kit, and we're going to do it on our 2016 Ram here. A couple special tools you might consider grabbing for this job. Number one is the Snap-on FRP 1215, which is going to help you remove your rail sensor out of the back of the fuel rail, or a 27mm deep socket will work. You also want a 47mm fan clutch wrench to take off your fan clutch. Alright, so the first step to installing the dual pump kit is going to be to take off your fan shroud and your fan assembly. On the 13 to 16, there are four fan support brackets. Just take the nuts off those support brackets, and then with your 47mm fan clutch wrench, loosen the fan up, and then take that fan nut off. And I found it easiest, rather than disassembling this whole bracket, to take this bracket off the front of the motor with taking the two bolts out, and then you can take this whole assembly out of the front of the truck together. Now, the next step is going to be to drain your coolant. Now, in the 2013 to 2016 trucks, the petcock is on the driver's side, down at the bottom of the radiator, and uses a 10mm hex to drain the coolant. Now that the coolant's drained, go ahead and take off your upper radiator hose. On the 2010 to 2016 trucks, we'll be able to reuse our factory hose. On the 2007.5 to 2009 trucks, you'll have to use the supplied hose in order to clear the second pump. As you can see here, we currently don't use our factory intake. We're assuming if you have dual pumps, you probably don't have a factory intake at this point. We've chosen a Glacier diesel intake, which is a really good cast intake. So the next step is going to be to actually remove that Glacier intake to provide room to install the rest of the kit. Alright, now that we've got our intake off and we are installing our deluxe kit with our distribution block and our hose and fitting kit, we're going to need to get rid of this fuel filter assembly. So we're going to go ahead and first thing you're going to do is disconnect the fuel heater, disconnect the water and fuel sensor, and then in back here you'll need to disconnect the fuel supply hose. And the way to do that is there's a red clip that comes in from the back that you have to pull that off, and then there's a white clip that you have to press and then pull down. It's a quick disconnect. So by pressing on that white clip with your thumb and pulling it down. So here's the fuel quick disconnect. It can be kind of tricky to get off. The best way to do it is to press that, push up, press that with your thumb, which will separate quick disconnect clips, and then you can pull it down off of the hose. Next, we'll go ahead and remove the 3 bolts that are holding the fuel filter canister. There's one here, and then one in the back. Once you disconnect the fuel filter canister, go ahead and disconnect the quick disconnect at the CP3 pump, and go ahead and remove the fuel filter canister. Alright, after the factory fuel filter canister is removed, we'll go ahead and remove the factory fuel filter canister bracket. And the way that we're going to do that is by removing 2 bolts up here, 1 bolt down here, which is behind this wiring harness, and then the 2 factory return Banjo bolts, which is below the intake runner. Alright, once we've got the factory fuel canister and bracket out of the way, next we're going to start removing parts to get to the fuel rail. From the factory, there's sometimes a shipping bracket on the back of the intake runner, and in order to take that off, sometimes you have to remove number 5 fuel rail line. So there's 3 bolts that would hold that bracket on. If you've still got that bracket, you'll have to take off number 5 injection line first, and then remove those 3 bolts. Alright, next we're going to go ahead and pull our connector that plugs into our rail pressure sensor. In order to do that on the 13 to 16s, you pull that yellow tab back, press the tab down, and pull it out of the rail pressure sensor. And then we'll go ahead and use our FRP 1215 or a 27 millimeter deep socket to pull the rail sensor out. Alright, next we're going to go ahead and install our fuel rail fitting adapter. This is going to go in place of where the fuel rail sensor was. Obviously this side is going to go into the rail, and what you're going to want to do before you install it is put a little bit of clean engine oil on that sealing surface and go ahead and install it into the fuel rail. And once you've got it installed, go ahead and torque it to 75 foot-pounds. Alright, our next step is going to be to install our fuel distribution block, which is right here. Before we do that though, we're going to take our water and fuel sensor out of the fuel filter canister. And be careful, because the first time you take this out, there's going to be a lot of fuel that comes out of there. But we're going to take our water and fuel sensor out and install it into the bottom of our fuel distribution block. Now, if you would prefer not to use this, then you can go ahead and use the plug that's in the kit. Alright, so the next step is we're going to install our fuel distribution block. To make it a little bit easier, it helps to put the fittings into the block before you install it onto the engine block. and then make sure you put if you're not going to use a sensor, to plug the sensor ports with the 1/8 inch NPT block-off plugs. And you'll want to make sure to put some anti-seize on the plugs before you put them into the block. That will allow or keep them from seizing up as you tighten them into the block. And then also make sure you either install your water and fuel sensor or your water and fuel sensor plug. Alright, next we're going to go ahead and install our factory Banjo bolts using the supplied copper washers. And just a note, we reuse the factory hardware, the factory bolts, to attach our distribution block to the side of the engine block. So after you've got the fuel distribution block installed and the returns installed to the top of the block, go ahead and make sure you plug in your water and fuel sensor if you chose to put that back in the block. And then we'll go over here to the factory CP3, and we'll go ahead and remove that feed fitting, which is a 17mm deep socket. And we'll go ahead and install our feed fitting. Alright guys, so putting the push lock hose onto the push lock fitting, the easiest way to do that is to get a little bit of a lubricant on the fitting itself, maybe like a WD-40 or something like that. Put it into a vise or something to hold it nice and tight, and then just twist and push as you do it, and then all the way up until it gets to that stop. Alright, now after the fuel distribution block is installed, we're going to start to install our high pressure lines. This is the rear high pressure line that will install into the rail sensor adapter plug, and then this side will go to the junction block. Now it's real important to make sure that these lines do not have any debris in them, because they're going directly into the rail, which is going to go directly into the injectors, and any small amount of debris could cause damage to any part of your fuel system. Alright, the next step is going to be to take this harness off of these two studs here. Pull that harness up and off of those studs. I've already got these studs loose, but they're a 10mm wrench to get those loose. Pull both of those studs out, and then we're going to install our bracket right here to hold our junction block. Alright, so once you've got your rear high pressure injection line installed, take your fuel pressure sensor and install it into the junction block, torque it to 75 foot-pounds, and then loosely install it onto the junction block bracket. That way you can use the slotted features to get you the range of motion that you need to get it into the correct position. So the way it's going to install is going to be right under this dipstick bracket. Use one of these studs, put it back into the location. Alright, once you've got the bracket and the junction block loosely installed, keep those studs loose so you can have some adjustability in where these lines get installed, and then go ahead and loosely install the rear injection line. Alright, next we're going to install our dual CP3 bracket. The easiest way to do this is to take the carriage bolts, install the first two into that portion of the bracket. Take your pulley spacer, put it into the back of the pulley, put the pulley onto the bracket, get that hole lined up with the threaded hole, and put your bolt into the pulley and thread it into the bracket. Once it's threaded into the bracket and tightened down, you can go ahead and install it into these two holes on the front of the motor. Now go ahead and install the two nuts in the back of those carriage bolts. Install the third carriage bolt right there, and install your M8 by 25mm bolt in the slotted hole on the left side of the bracket. Alright, here we've got our CP3K that we're going to go ahead and install into the pump bracket. We're going to just slide the pump down with the feed port pointing straight up, and then go ahead and install your 3 carriage bolts. Okay, once you have your pump securely installed, go ahead and remove your feed plug and your return plug and install your 1/2 inch CP3 feed fitting. Make sure you tighten that. Now the feed line from the distribution block up to here is going to slide on here. You're going to use the 90° -8 AN fitting at the distribution block to run up to the feed fitting, and what you're going to want to do is first install the hose onto that feed fitting, run it up to this fitting, get your length and cut it, and then you can create your hose there. Then go ahead and install your M12 to -6 AN return port and make sure you tighten that, and then you'll create your hose that goes from here to the top of the distribution block. And you'll use your 120° -6 AN return fitting here and a 90° -6 AN fitting down there. Alright, now that you've got all of your low pressure lines hooked up, go ahead and install your lift pump all the way up to your distribution block, and then that way you'll have a one location for your lift pump to feed to, and then it'll feed both of your pumps. Okay, after we've got our distribution block hoses run and installed, we're going to go ahead and install our second high pressure fuel line. Now, I can't stress the importance enough to make sure that there's no debris in the line before you install it. We'll go ahead and put it into the junction block, into the back of the CP3, and this is why you left the junction block loose, so you can manipulate it to get it to where you can torque the nut on the junction block, and then you can go ahead and put the nut on the CP3. Now, once the nuts are on, you're going to go ahead and align all of the lines where you want them to be. Torque these nuts to about 40 foot-pounds, and then go ahead and tighten your bracket bolts on the back side of the junction block and right up here by the fuel rail. Alright, so after our high pressure fuel system is installed, we're going to go ahead and install our Fleece Performance pulley onto our Fleece Performance pump. Install the nut onto the pump, and for now we're just going to go ahead and finger tighten this nut. Once we've got the belt on, then we can go ahead and torque that nut to 75 foot-pounds. Okay, now that the belt is installed, the pump nut is installed and torqued to 75 foot-pounds, we're going to go ahead and install our CP3x2 harness. The way we're going to do that is we're going to start by taking the connector off of the factory CP3 by squeezing the tab on the back of the fuel pressure regulator. Pull that out, and you notice that that connector is very similar to the CP3x2 connectors. We'll go ahead and plug this female connector into the factory harness, and then we'll plug this connector into the factory CP3, and the extension will plug into our dual pump. Alright, now that we've got our CP3x2 harness installed and routed out of the way of any moving components, we're going to go ahead and reconnect our fuel rail sensor. And the way that we're going to do that is we're going to clip a couple of the zip ties that we're holding the harness to the dipstick tube to be able to give us a little bit more room and to get the connector to be able to plug in easily. And after you've got those zip ties cut, go ahead and take this pigtail and route it above the high pressure line, and then you can go ahead and install that connector. Alright, once you've got your connector plugged back in, go ahead and re-secure your wiring harness to make sure that there's not tension on the connector or other connectors on this wiring harness. Okay, now we've got all of our dual pump components installed. We're going to go ahead and start putting our truck back together. If you live in a warm weather climate, or if you've got a competition vehicle, you may consider putting on one of our high flow intake plenums that also gets rid of your grid heater. Now you can see right here your grid heater is extremely restrictive, and so by installing one of our grid heater deletes and our high flow intake plenums, you'll drastically reduce your EGTs and your spool up time, which is going to give you a much more responsive truck and a much better drive. Alright, after you've got your fuel rail pressure sensor installed and securely fastened, go ahead and install your intake manifold. And remember to re-plug in your map sensor. Go ahead and install your fan shroud. And once all that's installed, go ahead and fill up your coolant, plug your batteries back in, and then go ahead and start the truck. Once the truck's started, I want you to look for fuel leaks, make sure that everything's tight, make sure you don't have any fuel leaks, and then you should be ready to go with your new Fleece Performance dual pump kit.